Okay, here I've already disconnected the clutch cable from the cover, and then working evenly in the crisscross pattern, you've got to unscrew the clutch cover bolts with an 8mm socket. What I did is I actually put a number on each hole and put a corresponding number on a plastic cup, and I put all the bolts in a numbered plastic cup, just makes it a bit easier. And then I just used a rubber mallet just to knock the cover off, and there's two recesses with a screwdriver. You can just prise it open and it comes off reasonably easily. I've already taken the gasket off here and cleaned it, but you need to take the old gasket off and clean it. And then the next job is to remove the starter idle gear and its shaft. And you've got to be a little bit careful when you take the shaft out. It's very oily and it's quite easy for it to slip out of your hands and it can fall into the engine, which is exactly what happened to me. So basically, once you've taken the shaft out and the idler, you just put that away, and then you've got to remove the clutch spring plate bolts in a crisscross pattern. Try and make a tool to reinstall these so you've got even pressure. You don't have to use a tool if you don't want to, but you can do. Okay, then you just remove the pull rod and the pressure plate comes off. You've got to be a little bit careful. There's a bearing in the inside of that pressure plate and it can work loose, and make sure it's seated in properly before you install it again. Okay, I used a pointed tool to unstake the rim of the clutch nut from the indent in the end of the shaft, and just do it quite slowly because it's made out of aluminium. It's quite tender. And then to actually unscrew the nut, it's important that the transmission is put into a high gear, and then I placed a piece of wood in between the rear wheel spokes and wedging it against the rear shocks, and then with a 30mm socket and an impact wrench, the nut came loose pretty easily. And then just unscrew the nut, and there's 3 washers behind it. Make sure you don't lose those. And then I just pull the whole of the clutch plate housing, just slips off, and it's important to keep all the clutch plates in order, in the same order, because they are different. It makes it a lot easier when you have to put it all back together again. Just be careful at the back of the clutch plate housing. There's also a washer, and it tends to be stuck on there with oil. Make sure you don't lose that. Okay, you want to ease the outer needle bearing off the input shaft in order to have sufficient play to lift the clutch housing up and out. The problem is that there's a little recess indent at the bottom, and it doesn't allow you to pull the clutch housing out completely. So by taking the first needle bearing out, it gives enough play for you to lift the housing up just a little bit in order to prise it open. Whilst you're doing that, the bearing sleeve will come out as well, and there's also a second needle bearing behind it, so just be careful. Okay, I'm removing the oil pump drive sprocket and chain, and that is actually my second needle bearing, which is actually still attached to it. Okay, here I'm going to be unscrewing the chain guide bolts, and I'm going to remove the chain guide. It's made out of plastic. You don't have to remove it, but I'm just taking it off just to make sure it's in good order. In this picture you can see the position of the roller bearing of the stopper arm located in the neutral detent on the selector drum. You can also see how the pawls of the selector arm locate onto the pins on the end of the selector drum. Now you can withdraw the gear change shaft assembly. Just to the right of the gear shaft assembly is a centralizing spring pin. I've actually left it in place. You don't actually need to take it out. Okay, now on just a little bit more further inspection, I can see there's just a slight chipping on the inside of the pawls of the selector arm. Now this might be causing the problems of not being able to downshift, but just ever so slight chipping, not very much. I'm not sure if that's the cause of the problem. Okay, now I'm going to be releasing the blue spring of the stopper arm. I need to release that spring in order to be able to take the stopper arm off. And that's with a Torx 30 Torx socket. The stopper arm comes off. Okay, now with an Allen socket, I'm going to be disassembling the selector drum, the detent wheel of the selector drum. I'm just taking it off just to be able to have a better visual check on it. It's not necessary to take it off. Seemed to be okay on place, but I'm just taking it off to make sure. And that's a 6 Allen head socket. And I was just inspecting that, and it seemed to be in perfectly good order. No chaffing, no wear whatsoever. Okay, I'm just giving a little bit more of a thorough inspection of the gear chain shaft assembly. Everything seems to be absolutely fine. The shaft is completely straight, it's not bent. The spring seems to be fine. Just a slight chip, as I said before, on one of the inside of the pawls of the selector arm. That's it, but ever so slight. It'd be interesting to see when the new bits arrive if anything has changed, if the spring is different, and everything seems to be in working order. Okay, that's the end of my disassembly video. I'll be doing another video when I put everything back together again. Okay, here I'm installing the new detent wheel, and remember that the bolt needs to be thread locked. There's a little notch at the back of it which aligns. It's pretty self-explanatory, and you have to tighten that up also to 12 Newton meters. I bought a new detent wheel, but I saw there was no wear on the previous detent wheel, but I just bought a new one as a cautionary measure. The stopper arm bolt needs to be thread locked as well. I'm just applying thread lock to the bolt of the stopper arm. Make sure that the bearing goes on the inside, and that needs to be tightened up to 12 Newton meters as well. When you install the stopper arm, you've got to make sure that it can move freely as soon as you've tightened it down. It needs to move freely, it mustn't be caught anywhere. Okay, here I'm attaching the spring for the stopper arm. To make sure you don't lose the spring, it's quite easy to drop it into the bottom of the oil sump. It's probably a good idea to put a rag at the bottom in order to catch anything if it does fall down. And then basically you want to make sure that the stopper arm is aligned to the neutral position in the detent arm, and you can see I'm actually in the neutral position there. It's where there's a flatter groove and a smaller groove, that's the neutral position. Okay, remember to remove the rubber O-ring off the new gear change shaft. That's to stop losing the outer washer. Okay, the gear change shaft can be slid into place. Make sure the spring ends embrace a centralizing pin on the right, and then you want to push the selector arm pulls over the pins on the selector drum detent wheel. So you just nudge it forward until you can feel the two pulls touching the pins. Okay, I'm applying some thread lock now to the oil pump drive chain guide. And this needs to be thread locked and tightened to 9 Newton meters, and there's 2 bolts. Okay, now you want to place the oil pump drive chain over its top sprocket and over the shaft. Let it drop down onto the shaft to gain slack in the chain to wrap the chain around the bottom of the oil pump sprocket. It's a little bit fiddly, but you find it. And as soon as you find that you've managed to wrap the chain around the bottom sprocket, you want to pull the upper sprocket up, and you want to insert. You basically want to insert the bearing sleeve from the clutch housing, and also the first needle bearing. And once you've managed to do that, then everything will be tight and in place, and just rotate the chain a little bit to make sure that it's attached to the bottom sprocket, and then you're good to go. You want to apply some oil to the number 1 starter idle gear, and then you fit it. Okay, at the back of the clutch plate housing, there's 3 locator holes which have to be aligned to the 3 pins. Okay, there's a little ledge that the sprocket, which is on the clutch housing, can drop into in order to facilitate the installation of the housing. And what I'm doing now is oiling up my second needle bearing, and putting a load of oil on it, and then that just slides in. Now I'm ready to install. First, put a load of oil on the number 2 starter idle gear, so a load of fresh oil on that. And then what I tend to do, what I found easier, was to not put the pin in immediately, and just to find the location by eyeballing it, and then once it's eyeballed, then you put the pin in. Can be a little bit fiddly, but I found that a more efficient way of doing it. And you can see I've already installed my main thruster washer on the inside of my clutch handle. And just make sure that everything is rotating. You rotate clockwise, and just make sure everything is bedded in, and and it's not going to slip out. Once you put the cover on, everything will just be secured in place. Okay, now I'm ready to put the clutch plates in, and I've already fitted the anti-judder spring seat and also the spring. The spring basically is fitted over the top of the anti-judder spring seat so that its outer rim is raised off the seat. Okay, now I'm just installing the friction plates and the main plates. The order of installation is in the description of the video, and there it's quite clear the order they have to go in. You will find that the main plate, which is the one I'm putting in down here, the plain plate, has slightly rounded edges on one side, and the other side is flat, and the slightly rounded edges on all of them go towards the inside. Okay, now I'm installing the spring washers, and there's one of them has an out scribed on it. Make sure that is actually facing out before you put it on. And then you install the new clutch nut, and that needs to be tightened to 95 Newton meters. In this video I haven't showed you, but I recommend you buy a special EBC or Triumph tool to tighten the clutch nut. I use a different method, and I didn't want to show it here because it's not really orthodox, because I didn't have the tool. Okay, next you want to lubricate with oil the pull rod and place it in. Okay, now I'm installing the pressure plate with the remaining friction plates and plain plates inside it. Okay, now you want to fit the pressure plate, aligning the outermost friction plate tabs with the shallow slots in the housing so they are offset from the rest. Fit the clutch springs, the plate with the out mark facing out, and the bolts. Then hold the clutch housing and tighten the bolts evenly and a little at a time in a crisscross sequence to 10 Newton meters. Okay, I'm finishing off now. I haven't done a video of me putting the cover back on because I did this with my phone and I ran out of battery, but just find that information online. That's the main procedure. It took me a while to do this, it took me a whole afternoon, but next time it'll probably just take me an hour and a half to 2 hours. And the bike is working absolutely fantastically now. I just hope it lasts.